Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lining with Purpose, a podcast where we explore themes of finding your true purpose, from quitting corporate, moving cities, practicing holistic health, and more. Join me as we discover our purposes together. My name is Julie Yoshinaga, and I'm so happy you're here. Today's topic is all about identity, and I want to talk about growing up Asian American in Los Angeles. I am specifically second and fourth generation Japanese American, and throughout my whole life, I have had an identity crisis. I've pretty much healed a lot of that now, but growing up, it really impacted my life and it did shape a lot of who I was. So let's talk more about identity, as I believe it is a big topic, especially when you are a child of an immigrant in the United States. This episode is also going to be a tribute to my grandparents, notably my grandpa on my dad's side. He was incarcerated in the Japanese American incarceration camps during World War II. And he also, after that, fought for this country when they stripped him of all his rights. And he still wanted to show his allegiance to America, which is a pretty heavy topic right now. But let's get more into this. And this one is for my grandparents. For this week's Beauty and Humanity, I do want to give a shout out to our super dunker. And if you don't know what a super is, I believe it's short for superintendent. And a lot of New York apartments have supers that live in the building or near the building. And the super is the one that is responsible for taking care of any of the maintenance in the building. So we'll call dunker if our shower is clogged, if the dishwasher is not working, or pretty much any maintenance that we need around the apartment. I didn't even know the concept of a super until I moved to New York, but Dunker is the hardest working man I know. He is always coming to our apartment to fix things, and I will say our apartment is built very cheaply, and we are obviously getting charged New York apartment prices, but I do see that as a really big issue. It's not just in New York, but even when I was in LA, there are so many quote-unquote luxury buildings that would look really nice from the outside, and the kitchen would look really great, the bathroom, the rooms, but everything that is inside of it is very cheap, so it is falling apart. So that is definitely our apartment. Things are falling apart, and we constantly need services on them. Regardless of that, Dunker is probably the hardest working man I know. If I'm leaving my apartment, 8 out of 10 times I run into him, and he's always cleaning the streets, picking up garbage, going to a different apartment building and, taking care of boxes, whatever it is, he is always doing something. Not only that, but we do have different businesses in our block, whether that's dry cleaning services, laundromats, and I noticed that he's built a very good community for himself. When he isn't working, he is talking to a store owner or someone that is also in the neighborhood, and it really is heartwarming to see the community that he's built in this neighborhood. Even though I've only lived here for a little less than a year now, I'm sure he's been here for many, many years, and he does really feel like he is the glue to this neighborhood. A lot of people come and go, especially in a city like New York City, but even if it's not New York, I think as kids grow up, they go do their own thing, and the parents stay back, or people leave their hometown city that might have been smaller for a larger city. And there are so many scenarios where people are always moving around, but there are also those people who are the pillars of their towns, their neighborhoods, and I think he's really one of those people. Being here and him just doing small things like maintenance in our building gives me comfort that we are so protected and also very taken care of. Shout out to all the New York City superintendents that are really shouldering a lot of responsibility for the experience of the people living in this city. So I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, and I've pretty much lived my whole life in Los Angeles, except for a short stint of time when we moved around for my dad's Air Force. And the first stop we made after California was Aomori, which is a prefecture in Japan, and there I lived on a military base. I don't really remember much of it because I was in preschool. And after that, we moved to Illinois in the town called Belleville. Here, there was a lack of diversity, and it was during a pretty formative time of my life. I was in kindergarten, and here I experienced my first encounters with racism. It's interesting because I was still very young. I think I was like 5 or 6. I still remember it to this day because it was obviously not a great experience, but at the time, I didn't think it was racism because I didn't know what that concept was. But as I grew older, those memories still stayed with me because they were negative. And it started to really click for me that it was because I was being excluded because of what I look like. It is so interesting that as a kid, you might experience something negative, but you might not know what it is. So you still remember it and then you process it as you get older. And that was definitely one of those moments. I remember specifically, it might not have been a really big incident because we were all still very young and kids, but a girl with an eye patch, which I still clearly remember her face, she would always exclude me from her friends. I was still the new kid on the block coming straight from Japan, and here I was really just trying to make friends. And if I would talk to her or her friends, she would always intentionally leave me out or turn her back on me. And sometimes as a kid, you don't realize that that's a sign that they don't want to talk to you, but I would really try hard to be included because the school is small and our class was probably under 30 people. So there wasn't a lot of people that I could have also been friends with. This also is not my specific memory, but as I got older, my parents talked about parent-teacher conferences at this kindergarten and how my dad is Asian American and he's third generation, so he doesn't have a quote-unquote Asian accent. And my mom is a newer immigrant, so she does have a Japanese accent when she speaks English. And the teacher at the conference blatantly told my dad in front of my mom, "How come your English is good, but your wife's isn't?" So there were so many small, ignorant remarks that were made. And I know that this was the middle of nowhere in the Midwest. So at this point in my life, now that I've done a lot of my healing, unlearning, I don't hold it against them. But these experiences as an Asian American girl at a young age, they have really shaped the way I was seeing the world. I'm going to fast forward. We moved back to California. However, moving from a small town in Illinois to the suburbs of Los Angeles, I didn't escape the racism. And even though Los Angeles is a very diverse city, I moved to a town called Palos Verdes, and depending on the side of the hill you grow up on, there is a lack of diversity. The specific elementary school I went to, I was probably one of 5 Asian kids in my whole grade, and because there were a lot of different classes, I was often the only one in my class. In elementary school, I specifically remember my mom always waking up super early to make me homemade obento, which are Japanese lunches. And there were so many times where I was made fun of for the food that I brought. I would get comments that my food was disgusting, and I started to become really ashamed of my mom's food, even though my mom is the best cook that I know. It got to a point where during lunch, I would kind of start to get anxious to bring out my lunch, and I would hide it in my lunch pail and I would try to eat it sneakily so people couldn't see inside my box anymore. And that was pretty much every single day of elementary school. I never got over feeling ashamed, and that has carried on through even my adult years. And even bringing lunch in a work setting, I remember feeling very ashamed, even though I was working in a multicultural marketing department and I worked in diversity, equity, and inclusion after that. I still had this sense of feeling ashamed because of all those small traumas that I experienced as a kid who couldn't fully embrace their culture. I started to ask my mom for lunch money so I could start eating quote unquote normal food and order pizza and all the unhealthy stuff that they give you at, for school lunches in the US. Those days would make me feel a lot of relief that I didn't have to open up my lunchbox. There was also an incident in middle school where we're getting a little bit older, girls are experimenting with makeup, and there was a girl in my science class and she was in my project. So we were in the same circle of tables that had to sit next to each other. And she had asked me to curl my eyelashes with the eyelash curler because she had never seen it on an Asian person before. The way it was said was with a lot of negative intention. Like, your eyes look so different, so let me see how it's done on yours kind of way. And if it had been approached with curiosity, it might have been better, but it was definitely said with the intention of making me feel othered in front of everyone around us. And naively, as a middle schooler, I didn't want to feel left out. So I think I just laughed it off and didn't understand the magnitude of that interaction until I was, again, a little bit older. Those moments were definitely very formative as an Asian American woman growing up in Los Angeles. And I don't think this is specific to Los Angeles, but growing up in the United States, where there are definitely many different cultures and ethnicities, sometimes you're going to encounter people who have a lot of privileges that don't understand you, and they're going to make you feel othered. And that was an experience that I had as an Asian American growing up. I'm going to move on a little bit from this part and also share that as a second generation Japanese American, I grew up going to Japanese school, and I would go twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and each session was 3 hours a week. I would always question to my mom why I had to go to extra school when all the other kids didn't have to go to extra school. I am extremely grateful that she made me go because now I have retained my motherland's language. But as a kid, you just don't realize how important it is to understand your culture and to not hate yourself. And for that, I am so grateful that my mom put me in Japanese school, even though I didn't understand it at the time. No matter how many times she told me that I would appreciate it when I got older, which I do, I definitely did not believe her at the time. My experience going to Japanese school was also an interesting one. As a second and fourth generation Japanese American, I felt like I didn't fully fit in. Being the daughter of a post-war and pre-war immigrant, I felt too Americanized for my Japanese immigrant peers, and I felt like I was also too Asian for my Japanese American pre-war immigrant folks. I'm going to explain that if it doesn't make sense right now, but the point was I just didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. Even within my own community, being Japanese, I felt like I was too American, too Asian, and even in my school settings with my peers there, I felt too Asian. I felt very othered, and there was a lot of time in my life where I felt just uncomfortable in my own skin. And it wasn't until I was older where I really got to experience loving who I was and accepting everything that I was. As a person of color, I think it is so important to learn to own who you are, and your identity is a superpower instead of a negative one. The experiences that you have bring so much to the table, and your culture is so special and also holds a lot of wisdom and power. As a person of color in the United States, I did feel like I was stripped of experiencing my culture for what it was and to authentically and comfortably show up as the person I am. And I am sad that there are so many people that experience what I have, even worse, actually. There are so many worse things that are happening beyond what I just experienced. This is probably minor compared to a lot of the violent things that are happening. And it's simply just not okay that this is the experience of people who are living in the places that they call home. Our cultures are beautiful. Our cultures are a superpower. Your experience as a person of color is very beautiful, and it's time that we reclaim every part of who we are, especially if you haven't done that yet. because it took me so many years to get to a point where I started to love who I was. I started to appreciate everything that I was, and I started to not be ashamed for the lunches that I was bringing and the language I was speaking, because it holds a lot of history and wisdom, and no one can take that away from you. My dad is third generation Japanese American, so that means that my great grandparents immigrated to the United States. And on my grandma's side, her family immigrated to Maui, Hawaii, and my grandpa's family settled in San Jose, California. On December 7th, 1941, that's when the Pearl Harbor bombing happened, where Japan attacked the United States. And after this happened, there was a lot of rhetoric that Japanese Americans who were in this country, a lot of which who had no tie to Japan whatsoever, they were demonized for their ethnic background and just for simply being Japanese American. FDR then signed Executive Order 9066 that forcibly removed Japanese and Japanese Americans from their homes, and a small percentage of people from other cultures that put them all into concentration camps. And I'm also going to talk about the importance of verbiage and vocabulary in case you're wondering why I use the term concentration camp. While these camps were being made, a lot of these Japanese and Japanese American people were sent to temporary housing, and my grandpa was specifically sent to Santa Anita racetracks. And yes, you heard that right, he was sent to the racetracks. So him and his family lived in a horse stall for many months while the concentration camps were being built. I remember asking my grandpa what the conditions were like in the horse stalls, and a lot of Japanese Americans don't like to speak about their experiences during this time because it holds a lot of shame for them when it shouldn't, because it was not their fault that they were removed from their homes and taken to desolate areas. But after asking my grandpa many times, he did share a little bit and shared that for him, he was still very young and able-bodied, so it wasn't as bad for him. But for people like his mom and the elderly, it was really hard to see because the conditions weren't great. It was dusty, it was tight. They were often sleeping on top of haystacks, and it was just not a livable condition for a human being. After his time in the racetracks, the 10 concentration camps were then constructed, so he was sent to Heart Mountain, Wyoming. A notable thing for all the concentration camps was that they were in very desolate areas, like I mentioned. A lot of them had very bad weather condition, and they didn't have a lot of other civilization next to them. And then there were the barracks, which were their living quarters, and these were also not great living conditions. They had a lot of holes in them, they were poorly constructed, so during terrible winters, it would be extremely cold because there was no insulation. And even in the summers, there were strong gusts in Heart Mountain, and a lot of sand and dust would be picking up and coming into their homes. Despite that, Japanese Americans at the time made the best of the situation, and they tried their best to live normally as they could. And I'm going to back up a little bit and share that when they were being sent off to camp, they only could take 2 suitcases or whatever they could carry, and that's it. So a lot of families had to leave their pets behind, their homes and their businesses, their cars that they owned. They had to get rid of all of that, most of which they didn't get back after the war, so they had to start from scratch. And the conditions were just very inhumane. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. In February of 1943, so they've been in camp for about a year at that point, the government sent a loyalty questionnaire to all the folks who were incarcerated. And this questionnaire had 2 very problematic questions at the end, question 27 and 28, and I'm going to share what they were. Question 27 was, are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty wherever ordered? And question 28 was, will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and faithfully defend the United States from any or all attack by foreign or domestic forces, and forswear any form of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese emperor or any other foreign government, power, or organization? This questionnaire was extremely problematic and ironic because, one, the government forcibly removed American citizens from their homes, stripped them of everything that they owned except for those 2 suitcases that they could carry, and they were asking these American citizens of this country if they would be loyal to this country that incarcerated their citizens. So I think it's absolutely insane that the government had the audacity to even ask this question. But majority of Japanese Americans chose to say yes and yes to both questions. There were a fraction of people who were called the no-no boys that said no to swearing their allegiance to this country, and for a very reasonable reason. During the time that this was happening, Japanese Americans really wanted to show their loyalty to this country because they had nothing else. A lot of them were not even associated to Japan at that point. They had never even gone to Japan. They hadn't even spoken Japanese, or a lot of them had tried to erase their Japanese language because they wanted to assimilate because of what the government was doing. And what they wanted to do was prove that they shouldn't be in the camps and prove that this was their country as much as it was for other white Americans. And that caused a big division from the folks who went off to war and for the folks who answered no and no to the questionnaire. I bring this up because I believe it is extremely relevant to what's happening today, but also because this side of my family, on my dad's side, like many other Japanese American families during this time, they lost a lot of their language and culture because of their need to assimilate to this country. As someone who has had family members incarcerated and affected by the Japanese American incarceration camps, I have grown to be very passionate about this topic because this is definitely something that should never happen again. And it feels really relevant because there are terrible things against humanity that are still happening, and history seems to be repeating itself. It does feel extremely heavy that basic human rights are being stripped away from people, and something that happened 80 years ago. I didn't imagine history to repeat itself again or ever. We need to talk more about this and shed more light on not just the history, that too, but making sure that our eyes are on the human rights. There are pre-war immigrants, like my dad's side, where a lot of them have lost their language, like I mentioned. And there are post-war immigrants, like my mom, and a lot of these people have their language still, or they feel more quote-unquote Japanese. As a kid growing up here, I felt this tug and pull from both sides where I didn't feel like I quite fit into both, because on one end, being able to speak Japanese made me feel like I was invalid in my family history and feeling like I got to claim this side, as weird as that sounds. And on my mom's side, it felt like I also couldn't relate to everything. As you can imagine, as a kid, navigating your identity is already really tough. And you mix race into that, and you mix your intergenerational trauma with that. Growing up and experiencing that had been a big roller coaster, to say the least. I've learned to understand that all parts of that had a lot of value and beauty in it too, where I got to experience most facets of my culture and come to a point where I could really use it to my advantage to help other people, because no one should feel like they have to fit in a box, because that is just impossible. Everyone comes into this world with their own unique life experiences and their backgrounds, and all of that has so much value. The memories from our ancestors and our past, they inform our life now, but also living in our current life, that also informs how we're going to live and learn from the past, and how you can use your experiences and their experiences to make a better world for the people around you and the community that you're going to be living in and supporting. It took a lot of work to get to where I am today. I carried a lot of my trauma from my past experiences growing up as an Asian American person and having a dual intergenerational Japanese American background and learning that my traumas don't define me and they only add to the perspectives that I could share to better the world and humanity. My growth in dealing with racism has taught me that these experiences that I had as a kid or in my adulthood, yes, they were negative, but I can't have that take my power away from me anymore. Yes, those racist things are never acceptable. It's not the right thing. However, everyone is here in this world to learn, serve their purpose, and become a better person. Whether they're doing that or not, that's up to them. But the intention is for us to grow as individuals and to use this human experience to become a better version of ourselves every single day. I can't hold on to the grudge or the hate from my past experiences. Otherwise, that's going to hold power over me. The only way that I could be liberated from feeling anything at all from what's happened is to let it go, give my forgiveness, and to understand that that was part of their human journey to grow from and to reflect on. And it's not my responsibility to teach them and to show them what's right and wrong. That's obviously their journey, but I can take those experiences and choose how it'll affect me in my life. I can either take a bad experience and understand that what they did was terrible and hold my inner child to heal when I need it and let it go and keep living my life and not let their actions affect my current one. Or I can go the opposite way, right? Where you go down a rabbit hole where it also puts hate in your heart and that grows and it creates a big division. I say this not through a lens of speaking on behalf of anyone else but myself. This is my own experience. This is how I see the world. And this is how I am growing from my life experiences. But I think as I'm learning from them and my family history and everything else that has come with the baggage of being who I am, that is the conclusion that I've come to. Maybe that'll change. Maybe that's going to evolve as well. It's important for us to take care of ourselves. And that is the first and foremost important thing. Holding on to anger and hate only does us a disservice because then we're giving them more power. Remember that. The more you can let it go and understand how terrible it was and to show up for your inner child so you can do the healing work and move on from it, you're not letting them have that power over you. I guess I've talked about a lot of things so far, but I share this part because as someone who has had my own life experience and my family's one, these are sort of the things that I'm taking away as I move forward in my life and the lessons that I have accumulated up until now. The last two things I'll say on this topic is that, one, I can only be responsible for myself and my experiences, so I will never absorb what someone else is putting onto me, whether that be a racist encounter, hate, negativity, whatever that may be. I choose not to absorb it because what they're trying to put onto me is not my responsibility. Of course, there are days where that can affect me, but I'm going to choose to cleanse my energy and repel it because it's not mine to claim. Number two, I know that I said I'd mention vocabulary, and I want to address this because I know there might be some folks who are questioning why I chose the word concentration camp. By using the term internment camps to describe what happened to Japanese Americans, it only minimizes the experiences that have happened to Japanese Americans during the time when it was not indeed an internment camp. And there has been solidarity in the fact that the use of the word concentration camp is in fact accurate for what happened to Japanese Americans. I'm going to be leaving some resources in the show notes to talk about the vocabulary and terminology that Japanese Americans use. Although my grandparents have been passed on both sides and I have no remaining grandparents anymore, I think about them often and why I get to live the life I do today. It is my responsibility to take their history and what they've gone through and to make sure that people learn about it because it is an important one. Because it's not only Japanese American history, but it's American history. And more people need to be aware of this so these same atrocities don't keep happening. They also are teaching me that we can use our experiences to do better for all other communities around us, because it's showing me that I can take my negative experiences and use that to do better in the world now. There is so much hatred and so much othering that is happening and coming out of the woodworks, and it has become extremely dangerous. I think it is really part of my duty as a person of color that has experienced parts of racism to make sure that other people feel safe and they don't experience the same sort of hatred that I did. I am so proud of my heritage and to be Japanese and Japanese American, and for all my family members that have come before me that have shaped me into who I am today. It's important for us to own our identities because we are each so unique and we bring so much value to this world. No one can take away who you are, your experiences, and what you bring to the table, because you are exactly who you're supposed to be. Harness your identity and your power for the good, because the more you can do that, the more better things you can do for humanity around you. I am so grateful for the skin and the body that I have been given and the identity that I hold in this lifetime, because as Julie, this is the journey that I'm supposed to be on, and to use it to do better for all the people around us and use my experiences, my ancestral background to make a change. And I hope that everyone can feel empowered to really step into who they are, because you deserve to feel proud of who you are and to be exactly who you are and who you're meant to be. Thank you so much for spending time with me on Aligning with Purpose. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast episode, and don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast so you never miss an episode. And be sure to connect with me on Instagram and TikTok at aligningwithpurpose.pod and @julioshi, JULIYOSHI. If you enjoyed today's podcast episode, please leave me a rating and review. Your support truly means the world, and catch you at the next one.